Okay, so this is going to be an overview of how a neuron works. We'll get a more in-depth look at this process during class. A few things to keep in mind. As you probably know from your biology and chemistry classes, positively and negatively charged ions are present throughout the body. The important ions for us right now are positively charged potassium, negatively charged sodium, and negatively charged chloride. The mixture and placement of these ions, both inside and outside the cell membrane, create an imbalanced charge. In other words, when the neuron is at resting potential or not firing, its internal charge is negative compared to the charge outside the membrane. As you also recall, most cells have a semi-permeable membrane that, under certain conditions, allows ions to move in and out of the cell through specific ion channels. When these ion channels open, the polarity of the cell changes from negative to more positive due to potassium rushing in and sodium rushing out. This change in polarity is initiated in the dendrites and flows into the cell body. Should the change in polarity reach a certain threshold, negative 55 millivolts, it will trigger an enormous change in the polarity called an action potential that will sweep down the length of the axon. This action potential is a change in polarity all the way up to at least positive 30 or even 40 millivolts. This positive charge moves down the axon in what we call an all or none response. If the threshold of negative 55 millivolts is not reached, nothing will happen, even if the charge reaches negative 56 millivolts. Once threshold is reached, the action potential will fire and it will set off a chain of events that must continue all the way down the axon. This positively charged action potential is also non-decremental, meaning it never decreases even as it splits down each of the neuron's terminal branches. At the terminal button, the electrical signal or action potential triggers the release of chemical neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters are stored in large structures called vesicles. The positive charge of the action potential causes the large vesicles to be pressed up against the cell membrane and pop open, releasing the neurotransmitter into a tiny space between the sending neuron and the receiving neuron, and we call this space the synaptic gap. To refer back to something you may have learned in biology, the chemical neurotransmitter is a ligand. The neurotransmitter will then bind to a specific receptor, causing ion-specific channels to open, allowing potassium into the cell dendrite, and repeating the process described previously. In this manner, a neural signal from your big toe is carried incredibly quickly up the neuron's axon to your spinal cord, where it synapses with another neuron in your spinal cord. The electrical impulse is then sent up the axon of that neuron, where it synapses with neurons in your brain, and you realize that you just stubbed your toe. There are a dizzying array of neurotransmitters at work in the human nervous system. For this class, you only need to know the major 7. Acetylcholine can be either excitatory or inhibitory, meaning it can either make it more likely that the neuron will fire, as in our example above, or it can decrease the chances that a neuron will fire by lowering the charge of the receiving neuron away from threshold. Black widow venom increases the effectiveness of ACH, causing muscle spasms and eventually heart failure. Botox, on the other hand, blocks ACH, causing temporary localized paralysis. ACH is also used in the memory system. Alzheimer's disease is the result of proteins blocking ACH in the synaptic gap, causing memory failure. Gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that is used throughout the nervous system to purposefully stop or slow down neuronal firings. Therefore, a lack of GABA is associated with heightened anxiety. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter used in a variety of areas in the nervous system. It is most commonly associated with learning and memory, although it has many other functions. Therefore, an excess or lack of glutamate is implicated in many psychological disorders. Norepinephrine is another excitatory neurotransmitter that is associated with mood and sleep regulation. Too much norepinephrine, and one might experience anxiety attacks. Too little, and one might suffer from depression. Now, it's always important to remember that no single set of neurons, and therefore no single type of neurotransmitter, is solely responsible for any one function. Therefore, norepinephrine, ACH, and serotonin are all implicated in mood and sleep regulation. Dopamine can be either excitatory or inhibitory, depending on where it occurs in the system. In the voluntary motor system, it's largely excitatory, causing neurons to send commands to muscles. In other areas, it inhibits and slows down signals to make movements smoother or even make thoughts more focused and specific. Because of dopamine's complex functions, disruptions to the dopamine system are associated with a wide variety of issues, such as addiction, Parkinson's disease, and even schizophrenia. Serotonin is the body's regulatory neurotransmitter. It can excite where needed or inhibit where needed. Because of this dual role, serotonin is important in regulating sleep, mood, attention, learning, and almost any function that requires the maintenance of some specific level of activation. Again, disruptions to the serotonin system can lead to a variety of issues, including depression and insomnia. Endorphins are another feel-good neurotransmitter. Both endorphins and norepinephrine can function as neurotransmitters or hormones. Therefore, you may also encounter them in the endocrine system. As a neurotransmitter, endorphins make us feel good. They mediate pain response and provide feelings of pleasure. In this way, endorphins are also important in the reward and addiction process. Oxytocin is another chemical that can be both neurotransmitter and hormone. The complex function of oxytocin is still a point of controversy. It has been called the love hormone due to its release in new mothers and role in creating emotional bonds. But it has also been linked to feelings and thoughts associated with fear and anxiety of others. In other words, oxytocin seems to make our bond to those we already like stronger, but it makes us fear and even hate those we don't like or know very well. So always keep in mind that any medication you take is acting upon this system, whether it's in small ways like allergy medicine acting upon GABA pathways, or big effects like lithium being used to treat bipolar disorder. Even coffee is a psychoactive drug. Okay, so this seems like a good place to take another break.